He looks like he wandered in from the parking lot. This table is for donors, not delivery boys.
Claire said, loud enough for the whole table. Keanu Reeves didn't respond. He didn't need to, because what happened next would shatter every assumption and leave Claire Vaughn wishing she'd never opened her mouth. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, let us know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss a single twist. Now, London shimmered that night. The Royal Albion Grand Ballroom had never looked more radiant. Draped in cascading crystal chandeliers and walls lined with silk panels the color of midnight, the entire space pulsed with elegance. Gilded columns reached toward the ceiling like a cathedral, and a champagne fountain stood at the center of the entry hall, its golden arcs catching the light in a way that made even royalty glance twice. Outside, the valet line shimmered with luxury. Bentleys, Aston Martins, and Rolls-Royces moved like silk along the cobbled driveway. Guests stepped out dressed in tuxedos cut to perfection and gowns that whispered secrets with every movement. It was the annual Royal Horizon Gala, a glittering tradition hosted by Prince William, attracting the world's most powerful philanthropists, moguls, and celebrities. The invitation alone was printed on hand-pressed parchment, sealed with wax, and delivered by courier. Simply being seen at this event said one thing: you belonged. And Claire Vaughn had never questioned that. As she stepped out of her chauffeured car, camera flashes welcomed her like an old friend. Her floor-length silver gown shimmered beneath her pearl-lined cape, and her sleek blonde hair was pinned into a perfect chignon. She smiled, briefly, but only for the press. Inside, she was already calculating the seating arrangements. The opening bid. Who'd outshine who? That was when she saw him. Just ahead of the check-in, standing beneath the marble archway, was a man who didn't belong to this world. He wore a simple black t-shirt, dark jeans, and plain sneakers. Sneakers, for heaven's sake. No cufflinks, no designer shoes, no tailored suit. He stood with a quiet stillness, waiting his turn at the guest list station. Claire's heels clicked sharply as she approached. She didn't slow down. With a faint frown, she leaned toward the young staffer holding the iPad. "Is there a side entrance for deliveries?" she asked sweetly, with the kind of smile that made people agree even when they didn't understand. The staffer blinked. "Sorry, ma'am?" Claire nodded toward the man. "He's clearly not here for the event." Before the staffer could reply, the man's invitation beeped against the scanner. "Valid. Approved. Priority access." "Thank you," the man said softly and walked past the rope. Claire's smile faded. "Excuse me," she whispered more firmly. "Who is that?" "He's on the royal guest list," the staffer replied, a little too casually. Claire didn't respond. She simply turned and entered the ballroom, her gown sweeping behind her like a curtain about to close on an act she didn't like. Inside, golden lights bathed the room in warmth, and an orchestra swelled as she moved toward the VIP tables near the stage. A butler bowed, then gestured toward her seat. And there, already seated beside her place card, calmly sipping water, was the man in a t-shirt. He glanced up as she approached, nodded politely. Claire Vaughn froze, and for the first time in years, she felt the sting of uncertainty. Table 1 sparkled under the chandelier's glow. Polished silver, etched crystal, and a centerpiece of white orchids that looked freshly flown in from Kyoto. Claire Vaughn approached her seat, the train of her gown sweeping the floor like a queen entering court. But as she neared, her heels faltered. Someone was already seated beside her, and not just anyone. It was him, the man from the entrance, the one in the black t-shirt and jeans. He sat with quiet composure, sipping water from a crystal goblet, as if oblivious to how entirely out of place he looked. There was no tuxedo, no silk tie, no Rolex peeking from beneath a tailored cuff. Just plain clothes, plain posture, plain presence. Claire's gaze dropped to the place card beside hers. It was blank. No name. Just gold trim and the printed word, guest. Her eyes narrowed. I didn't realize they were seating staff at the main table now, she said lightly, sliding into her chair. The man looked over, calm, neutral. I was invited, Claire offered a tight smile. Oh, I'm sure you were. I just didn't expect the dress code to bend this much. He didn't respond, didn't look embarrassed, didn't offer to explain himself. He just returned to the wine menu in front of him like she wasn't there. Claire's smile sharpened. You know, it used to mean something to sit at this table, she said, lifting her champagne. Now I suppose it just means you replied quickly enough. The man glanced up. Maybe it still means something, just not to the same people. Claire blinked, not because of what he said, because of how calmly he said it. She adjusted her diamond cuff and leaned closer, dropping her voice just enough to seem civil, but loud enough to be overheard. Look, I'm not judging, I just think certain traditions matter. Decorum, presentation. After all, this isn't a pub quiz night in Shoreditch. Still, no reaction, not even a smirk. Across the table, a banker from Zurich leaned over and asked Claire if she knew the gentle. She replied with a laugh. I'm assuming someone slipped him in as part of the entertainment. A little social experiment for the prince's amusement, perhaps. The banker chuckled uncomfortably. The stranger said nothing. And Claire hated it. She was used to dominating a room with words, to crafting glances sharp enough to wound. But this man, this silent, dressed-down anomaly, refused to play by her rules. He didn't shrink. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look amused. He just was. And for Claire Vaughn, that was intolerable. Before we continue this story, let us know you're still here with us by dropping a number 3 in the comments below. The second course had barely arrived when Claire decided she'd had enough of being subtle. Across the table, Baron Langley was swirling his glass of Burgundy, offering some tedious anecdote about vineyards in Provence. Claire laughed politely, then turned her attention, not so accidentally, back toward the man seated beside her. He was still there, still quiet, still in that black t-shirt like it was a conscious defiance. She leaned toward Langley just enough for her voice to carry. Isn't it fascinating, she said sweetly, how minimal effort is becoming fashionable? You could show up in gym clothes these days and still be called authentic. Langley, already 3 glasses in, chuckled. It's the era of dressing down to be taken seriously. I believe they call it strategic humility. Claire smiled, eyes never leaving the man beside her. Ah, yes, I do love strategy. Though I always thought humility came with manners. The stranger kept eating. Slowly, methodically, unbothered. Claire's fork clinked slightly against her plate. Would you like me to ask the kitchen if they have a spare jacket? She said, voice poised like a knife. Something a bit more appropriate? He looked up, held her gaze for half a beat too long, then calmly took a sip of water and said nothing. The restraint was maddening. Around them, the air shifted. A few other guests began exchanging glances. Lord Ainsworth raised an eyebrow, leaning toward Claire. Friend of yours? Claire smirked. Oh no, but apparently being mysterious is in fashion again. Someone from across the table murmured, Is he someone we should recognize? Claire tilted her head, a glint of triumph in her eyes. I doubt it. I think if he were anyone of note, he wouldn't be hiding behind silence. Still, the man didn't flinch. He wasn't defending himself. He wasn't correcting anyone. And that infuriated her more than any rebuttal would have. Well, Claire continued, now fully performing, whoever arranged the seating chart must have had a sense of humor or a blindfold. Polite laughter followed, the kind of laughter born not from amusement, but from social obligation. A few guests chuckled awkwardly. One woman looked down at her plate, Another sipped her wine too quickly, but no one stopped her. No one questioned it, because Claire Vaughn, queen of the donor circuit, had always controlled the room. Except tonight, something was different, because the man beside her wasn't reacting. He wasn't rising to defend himself. He wasn't playing. He was just watching. And in that silence, Claire felt something cold begin to crawl beneath her skin, a strange, unfamiliar chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the auctioneer took the stage. A hush fell over the crowd, the subtle quiet of polished forks lowering and crystal glasses stilled mid-air. Claire leaned back in her chair, her posture regal, eyes half-lidded with boredom. She had seen it all before. Donors pretending to compete, only to drop out with rehearsed grace. A performance, like everything else tonight. The auctioneer began with the first item, a signed first edition of Wuthering Heights, starting bid £10,000 sterling. Predictably, the banker's wife 2 seats over raised her paddle. Lord Ainsworth followed. Then came an oil painting from a private French collection opening at £75,000 sterling. That's when it happened. From the corner of her eye, Claire saw the man in the T-shirt calmly raise his paddle. She turned to him so sharply her earring nearly spun. "Oh," she said aloud, loud enough for others to hear, "how bold of you." He didn't respond. The auctioneer acknowledged the bid and continued. The amount climbed. £90,000 sterling, £95,000 sterling. Keanu raised his paddle again. Claire let out a soft, theatrical laugh. "I must say, this is admirable, or perhaps ambitious is the better word." Someone chuckled nearby. Claire caught their eye, emboldened. One must love a man with dreams bigger than his wallet. Still, Keanu said nothing. His hand rested calmly near the paddle, eyes on the stage. The room had begun to watch, only slightly, but it was enough for Claire to press further. "Do let me know if you'll need help covering the final payment," she added, voice dipped in honey. "Or we can start a little fundraiser just for you. I hear a donation box in your name would fit right in with the decor." Laughter rippled faintly around the table, but not everyone laughed. The man across from her shifted uncomfortably. The woman to her right reached for her drink a little too quickly. Someone coughed. And Keanu? He didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply raised his paddle again, this time for £100,000 sterling. The auctioneer's gavel dropped with a satisfying clap. "Sold." Applause followed, but it was brief, polite, measured. Claire leaned toward him, her voice now low and venomous. "I do hope they accept payments in monthly installments." This time the man turned his head, slowly. He met her eyes, calm, still. "I think I'll manage," he said, barely above a whisper. And just like that, something shifted. It wasn't in his words, it was in the stillness that followed, the way the surrounding chatter faltered, the way a woman across the room glanced over, brows furrowed, the way Lord Ainsworth blinked like he just remembered something, but couldn't place it. Claire, for the first time that evening, felt eyes on her for the wrong reason, but she still smiled, still sipped her champagne, still believed, foolishly, that she had just won. The applause from the auction barely echoed before Claire waved over a passing waiter. Her voice, as always, was velvet-covered steel. "Be a dear and ask the event coordinator to stop by," she said with a smile. "There may have been a seating error." The waiter blinked. "Of course, ma'am." Beside her, the man in the T-shirt was folding his bidding card and tucking it into his jacket pocket. A jacket he didn't wear, Claire noted, because, clearly, he didn't own one. She turned toward him, speaking as if they were old acquaintances. "Don't misunderstand me," she said sweetly. "I admire your confidence, but you must see how this looks." He raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Like someone wandered into a Monet with muddy boots," she replied. There was a pause, brief. cold. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. A woman across the table cleared her throat. Someone else looked away. Claire noticed but dismissed it. They weren't disagreeing, they were uncomfortable, and that was different. A moment later, the event coordinator arrived, young, nervous, overdressed. Claire smiled at him with practiced warmth. "Darling, there may have been a minor confusion. This gentleman here, he doesn't seem to have a place card. I just want to ensure he's not been mistakenly seated." The coordinator's face paled slightly. He checked the clipboard in his hands, fingers moving too fast. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I can't disclose guest arrangements. But he's exactly where he's meant to be." Claire's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite defeat. "Of course, forgive me," she said, her voice like porcelain. Fragile, cold, breakable. The coordinator bowed and retreated. Claire turned back to her wine, the glass clinking against her ring. "Protocol is dying, isn't it?" she murmured to no one in particular. Then she reached for her clutch, opened it carefully, and tapped into her phone with slow deliberation. A text, quick, coded, to one of the foundation aides. She wouldn't ask for him to be removed. She'd suggest a shift in seating, rebalancing. For optics. Across the table, someone noticed. Lord Ainsworth glanced at her, then at the man beside her, then looked away entirely. The silence around the table thickened. Then, slowly, the waiter returned. But not with champagne, with a folded piece of paper. He leaned down and whispered something to Claire, slipping the note into her hand. She opened it, read the words once, and froze. There, in crisp typeface, were 5 words. "Please stop. He's the owner." Claire's heart stuttered. Her throat went dry. She folded the note carefully, not letting her expression change. But inside, her mind was racing. Owner? Owner of what? Of the painting, the auction, the room, the moment she thought she had control, had the crowd, had the upper hand, was crumbling beneath her. Quietly. She glanced at the man. He hadn't moved, hadn't seen the note. Or perhaps he had and simply didn't care. He was finishing his glass of water, one hand resting lightly on the table, and suddenly Claire felt the heat rising to her cheeks. For the first time in the entire night, she was the one unsure if she belonged. The lights dimmed again, this time with purpose. The orchestra faded into a delicate, expectant silence. From the far end of the ballroom, a spotlight flickered, then settled on the grand staircase lined with royal blue. Gasps fluttered like falling silk through the crowd. Prince William appeared at the top step. Dressed in a classic midnight glue tuxedo, poised and calm, he descended with the kind of effortless grace that silenced even the most self-important donors. Conversation ceased. Forks were set down. Champagne flutes paused mid-air. Claire straightened in her seat. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. Her chance to be seen, again, as the face of grace, composure, and legacy. The prince stepped onto the stage, took the mic, and smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth, commanding. "Thank you for being here tonight. Your generosity, your continued support, and your presence mean the world. Not only to this foundation, but to every life it touches." Soft applause, nods, smiles. Claire folded her hands on the table, ready for her subtle bow of acknowledgement when he thanked key contributors. "Tonight," he continued, "we've raised over £7 million, a milestone we didn't expect to reach so soon." Applause grew louder. Claire allowed herself a small, serene smile. But then, his tone shifted. "Much of that success is due to one guest, a guest who asked for no recognition, no spotlight, and no title. Someone who believes in quiet giving, in long-term impact, and in using influence not to impress, but to protect." A hush fell. Claire's smile faded, just slightly. He came tonight not as a celebrity, not as an icon, Not even as a name on the program, but as a friend, a partner, and, unbeknownst to many of you, a pause. The room leaned forward. The new co-owner of the Royal Horizon Foundation. Claire blinked. She wasn't breathing. Please join me in recognizing someone who's changed thousands of lives, funded schools in Kenya, rebuilt medical centers in Cambodia, and quietly transformed how we think about philanthropy in the modern world. Claire turned. He was already rising. The man in the black t-shirt. The man she mocked, ridiculed, tried to remove. Keanu Reeves. He stood slowly, nodding politely to the prince, who stepped down from the stage and extended his hand. Thank you for being here, Keanu. A wave of shocked applause filled the room. People turned, whispered. Phones were subtly raised. Some gasped audibly. Claire's heart pounded. Keanu didn't look at her. Didn't need to. He simply nodded to the prince, said something quietly, then offered a smile that was small but unmistakably kind. He wasn't gloating. He didn't have to, because everyone else was doing it for him. Claire sat frozen, her spine straight, her expression locked. But inside? Inside, she was shattering. Claire Vaughn didn't move. The applause crashed around her like waves against stone, louder than it should have been, sharper, more sustained. Every polite clap felt like a thunderclap inside her chest. Keanu Reeves stood in the soft glow of the spotlight, exchanging a quiet word with Prince William. The two men smiled, shook hands again, and Claire sat in silence. Not one muscle in her face twitched, but inside, something fragile cracked. Not a clean break, a slow fracture, starting somewhere beneath her ribs and spreading outward, until even the weight of her necklace felt unbearable. She didn't dare look around, but she didn't have to. She could feel it. The heat behind her ears, the slight rustle of someone leaning back to whisper behind a hand, the unmistakable silence of guests trying very hard not to look directly at her, while definitely looking. Across the table, Lord Ainsworth cleared his throat. The Swiss banker reached for his wine but missed the stem by a half-inch. A young woman 2 seats away looked down at her phone and let out the tiniest gasp. Claire didn't blink. Her gaze remained fixed on the white linen tablecloth, on the curve of her own champagne flute, on anything that wasn't him. She tried to inhale, but the breath caught high in her throat. Tight. Dry. Wrong. The owner. The words on that folded note replayed in her mind like a curse. Please stop. He's the owner. She had mocked him, belittled him, openly questioned whether he could afford the price of a painting, only to discover he had funded the entire auction house behind it. And now his name was being spoken by royalty, applauded by the elite. And her name? Not even whispered. Her reputation, carefully crafted over decades, one gala at a time, now felt thinner than the wine in her glass. She glanced to the side. Keanu had returned to his seat, still silent, still calm, and for the first time she realized the silence wasn't emptiness. It was control. She had spent the last hour performing, and he had simply been. No effort, no defense, no retaliation, and now he sat there, relaxed in a t-shirt, while the entire room tilted in his favor. Claire's fingers trembled slightly against her lap. She gripped her clutch until the leather creaked. The applause was fading now, people were settling again. But the air had changed, colder, heavier, because everyone knew what she had said, what she had implied, and no one was laughing anymore. Claire Vaughn had always known how to command a room, not with noise or theatrics, but with presence. Whether at a private art gala in the south of France or a political dinner in Westminster, she was the one people gravitated toward, the name whispered first, the smile cameras sought. But tonight the only thing she could hear was the subtle shift of people turning away. The music resumed softly, a gentle waltz humming through the ballroom like a polite apology. Conversation picked up here and there, soft laughter, clinking glasses, a well-placed compliment tossed across tables. But at table 1, something had changed. The air was no longer heavy with prestige. It felt thinner now, as if the room had quietly exhaled and left Claire behind. She took a measured sip of champagne, her hand steady but her pulse loud in her ears. Lord Ainsworth, who had once relied on her nod before bidding, was now angled away, laughing with someone from tech. The Countess Bellamy, once an eager audience to Claire's every clever remark, now offered only a thin-lipped smile before turning to another guest to discuss the flower arrangements. No one mentioned the man in the black t-shirt. No one said his name, and yet his presence, his reveal, hung in the air like fine dust, impossible to see but impossible to ignore. Claire reached for her phone, more from instinct than need, and opened her messages. There were several: her assistant, a foundation liaison, 2 journalists, all asking the same question without saying it directly. What happened? She didn't respond. When she looked up again, a photographer across the room was adjusting his lens, but not toward her. His camera was pointed at the opposite end of the table, where Keanu now stood in quiet conversation with Prince William, his posture relaxed, his face lit softly beneath the chandelier's glow. No flashbulb sought her out. No curious glance followed her movement. For the first time in recent memory, Claire Vaughn realized she was no longer the subject of the room, not the voice it listened to, not the headline it chased. Just a woman in a silver gown, sitting very, very still, while the room turned gently toward someone else. Claire remained seated long after the applause had faded, after the wine had been poured, after Keanu Reeves returned to his seat and resumed his silence like nothing had happened. She smiled, she sipped, she nodded at jokes she didn't hear, and answered questions no one asked. It was autopilot now, grace stitched from instinct and pride. But deep beneath the surface, panic bloomed. Not the kind that made you gasp, but the kind that made the room feel too bright, the walls too far, the chair too small. She leaned toward the woman beside her, someone from an arts committee in Vienna she barely remembered meeting last spring. "Quite a reveal, wasn't it?" Claire said lightly. "I suppose that's what these events are about, surprises." The woman smiled, but it was the kind of smile people use when a stranger comments in an elevator. Claire tried again, shifting toward the opposite end of the table. "Do you know if Keanu's involved with other foundations?" "He's certainly made an entrance," but Lord Ainsworth only nodded vaguely, as if her voice had lost its sharpness, had been turned down to background volume. Claire could feel it now. Not judgment, not outrage. Worse, dismissal, the kind that comes not from scandal, but from no longer being essential. She rose, excused herself with a graceful tilt of her chin, and stepped away from the table, weaving between clusters of guests without drawing a single eye. No one followed. No one called her name. She made her way to the mirrored hallway near the coat room, where the music thinned and the air cooled. She stood there alone, staring at her reflection under the soft chandelier glow, the same gown, the same jewels, the same posture she had practiced her entire life. But something was missing. The room, the echo, the attention. Her phone buzzed in her hand again. She didn't look. From down the hall she could still hear laughter. Keanu's voice low and steady, Prince William chuckling. A cameraman called his name, and the flash lit the corridor like distant lightning. Claire didn't go back. There would be no dramatic exit, no redemption speech, just the quiet truth that she, Claire Vaughn, once untouchable, had spoken too soon, too loud, to the wrong man, and now the world wasn't listening. Because someone else already had the microphone. Sometimes the loudest person in the room is simply trying to hide how little they truly hold. And sometimes the quiet one, the overlooked, the dismissed, is the one who carries everything. Claire Vaughn thought power came from posture and pearls. But real power? It speaks softly and lets others expose themselves. If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something, drop a 6 in the comments and let us know. Have you ever misjudged someone and regretted it later? We're here, we're listening, and we read every word.